Welcome back. Today we're going to continue a series of conversations that I've been having lately titled, Can I Get Paid to Do That? And today we're going to be asking the question, can I get paid to be a public speaker if I'm a relatively new speaker, I don't have a large audience, and I may seem to be relatively unknown in the online social space? And I thought there's nobody that I would want to have this conversation more with other than Grant Baldwin from the Speaker Lab. Grant and I go back nearly 15 years now. You and I have been speaking.
It's been a minute. Yeah, for sure.
We've shared a lot of the same stages, and we've run in a lot of the same entrepreneurial circles. And I know that you have had an incredible amount of experience teaching and training people through the Speaker Lab. Grant, can you explain real quickly how you got into public speaking and how long ago did you start the Speaker Lab and why did you start it?
Yeah, good to see you, buddy. And always
great
good
to see you.
Spend time with you. You're right. We do go way back. So a little bit before you and I connected. So if we go further back there, I actually went to Bible college. I was a youth pastor for a little while. Parts of it I liked, parts of it I didn't like. But one of the things I really enjoyed from that was I enjoyed speaking. And being a youth pastor gave me a lot of opportunities to speak. I'd speak on like Wednesday nights to students. And then every so often I get to speak on Sundays in big church, and really enjoyed it, wanted to do more of it. And I felt like maybe some people who may be watching or listening to this feel of kind of going like, I want to be a speaker, whatever that means, but I don't know, like, how does that, what does that even mean? How does that work? Like, what do you speak about and who do you speak to and who hires you and how much you charge? Like, how does this work? Because for most people, speaking is like this mysterious black box. And even like you alluded to, Cliff, it feels like I need to be well known. I need to have a best-selling book. I need to have a huge social media following. I need to have overcome some type of crazy obstacle. I need to have some type of validation or reason that would justify me being a speaker. And so we're going to demystify all of that today. But I had those same type of limiting beliefs. And so I found myself 20 years ago or so. At the time, there's no podcasts or resources or books or courses or trainings on speaking. So I found myself emailing other speakers, stalking other speakers, kind of pick your brain sort of stuff, learned a couple of things, started booking some gigs, and eventually got to a point where I was doing about 60, 70 gigs per year, all over primarily the US, and loved it. It was awesome. And then I started having a lot of people asking me the same questions of, hey, I see you're a speaker. How do you do this? How does this work? And so we started doing some training around that. And that started about 10, 11 years ago. And that evolved to what we do today, which is the Speaker Lab. And so we teach, train, coach speakers on how to get booked and paid to speak. And so there's a lot of people that we work with who go, hey, I know exactly what I want to speak about. And other people are like, I don't have a clue what I want to speak about. I just know that I like speaking and I don't know how this works. And so one of the cool things about speaking that I'm sure we'll get into today is there's a lot of like variation of what this may look like to make sense for you. Meaning some people watching, listening may say, hey, I want to do 100 gigs a year. And some people are like, that sounds awful. I would love to do 5 gigs a year, but I just don't know. How do I find those? And some of them may say, hey, I want to travel a lot. And some will say, I don't want to travel at all. I want to do more local things or regional things or virtual things. And again, it's not that one side is better than the other. It's ultimately comes down to like what makes sense for you, which I know is what we'll be talking about today.
I love it. And did you say when you started the Speaker Lab as a training program?
Yeah, started about 10 years ago or so. So yeah, we've been at this for a little while. In fact, the past 5 years, we've made the Inc. 5000 list, which is the 5,000 fastest growing privately held companies in the US. And so, yeah, we've been at it for a while. We've helped thousands of speakers. And, one of the cool things about the speaking industry that I really like is it's been around since the dawn of time, meaning like it's survived wars and depressions and recessions and pandemics and 9/11. And so regardless of what happens in a world where we all have major question marks about AI and technology and robots, and like, what does this mean? But hard coded in the DNA of every single one of us is the desire to connect with other humans, So even like before we started recording here and before we went live, you and I go way back. So we were just catching up. I was like, dude, it's just good to see my friend, and good to catch up with a human. And so, and even more so if we were together in person. And so people crave that human connection with other people. And so that gives me a lot of confidence that regardless of what impacts technology may have in the world in the future, is that people still desire to connect with other people and gather together and hear from someone as a speaker.
Yeah, I do agree with all of that. And one of the things that I love about what you shared as far as the duration that you've had the Speaker Lab is it's been nearly a decade, if not over a decade. I remember when you launched it. You launched it back in the days when online courses were all of the rage. Everybody had an online course on everything. And it speaks to me that the Speaker Lab has stood the test of time. Not only that it still exists, not only is it something you're still actively marketing, still actively teaching, focused on today as a main central figure of what you're doing for your business, but it's also got an incredible reputation through all of that duration as well. And that's something I want to point out to anybody listening in. I don't just invite anyone to be a guest on the content that I create. I look for people who are experts, who are trusted, who are actually doing something that is making a difference in people's lives rather than making a bunch of bold promises and then you get a course and you're left to your own devices. So,
I appreciate the kind words. And two, I think that that's so true that especially in the online space, there's certainly people that kind of bounce from thing to thing to thing. And it's like, what's the flavor of the week? Or what's the hot topic? And yeah, suddenly I'm in, the AI experts, we're crypto experts a couple of weeks ago and whatever the next thing will be. And so I think that hopefully we are someone who what's Grant up to? Oh, he's still doing the same thing. What's Cliff up to? He's still podcasting. He's still in the game, And so continuing to show up, I think that longevity, to your point, helps you build credibility and a reputation in the business.
The reason why you and I are speaking today, Grant, is I have been working with a client recently. He is retired now, has had a very lengthy and very successful legal career as a lawyer. He's also been very much involved in politics throughout the years. He's hosted his own radio show, turned podcast, turned live stream, sharing his political perspectives and sharing his perceptions of the news media today and what's going on in the world. In his retirement, he came to me and says, Cliff, I think I want to become a coach. I want to hire you to tell me how you actually built a business model that allows you to coach for a living, because he hired, by the way, he happened to have been one of the first paid clients I ever had as a podcast answer man consultant. He was a friend of my dad in the insurance business. And he's like, listen, I want to create a radio show. I want to turn it into a podcast. I want to hire you. And so he's witnessed my own journey and evolution in online business. And he's like, Cliff, you're crushing it today with coaching. And I want to learn how to coach. I want to get paid to coach. Do you think with my years of experience as a lawyer, my influence in the political space, the arena, do you think that I could create an economic model to earn some extra income in my retirement as a coach? And I said, I can certainly share with you all of the things that I've learned along the way, and I'm happy to share with you the business model, and we can talk through it. Turns out that after the end of our second session, we found out that he didn't actually want to be a coach, but he had signed up for a program that taught that the only way that you could do what he most wanted to do ultimately was to become a coach and create courses. And you have to become well known. And unless you do that and you build this audience and you've got all of this background of what you're known for, you'll never get booked for what he wanted to do, which is to be a paid speaker. And everything I know about him, he's a gifted communicator. He could speak on any stage. He's spoken on many stages, but never as a paid speaker. I'm like, why are we going through creating a course? Why are we trying to be a coach? Why not just go out and get yourself a couple $10,000 speaking gigs? He went and started doing research on his own, and it seemed that everybody he ran into said that, number one, unless you are known for something, you're an expert in something, you're not going to get hired to speak, you're not going to get paid to speak. He was told that unless you have a large enough following that by your name appearing on the list of speakers, and that alone will sell tickets, you're not going to get paid to speak. And yet I happen to remember one of your sales pages that, hey, you could get booked to speak even if you don't have a large audience and even if you're not yet well known and you haven't been a published author. So that's why we're having this conversation. And what would you say to somebody who is in that situation?
Yeah. So there are parts of the kind of outside feedback that they got that there's some accuracy to, and there's other parts that I would kind of disagree with. A lot of it really depends on someone's expectations, meaning there are speakers who get paid $100, a couple $100, $1,000 to speak, and speakers who get paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to speak. And typically, the further that you're going on that spectrum, where the higher the fees are going to be, it is less about what they are going to actually speak about and more that can they actually sell tickets, right? So if you go speak at something, or if you go attend an event and Oprah is speaking at it, or Obama, or Trump, or some major personality or name, you don't really even care what they're speaking about. You're there because they're speaking and like, oh, I saw them and they were, good or funny or interesting or fascinating or whatever it may be, right? Now, the reality is like you, me, most likely this person are not at that level where we on our own are going to be able to put butts in seats, right? So what an event organizer is hiring us to do is to come in and solve a problem for an audience. And so oftentimes in like a conference, for example, is they may have, a couple of, let's say like a bigger conference, they may have a couple of keynotes, and then they may have, a whole bunch of breakout sessions. And so they may have a couple of keynote spots that are there to bring in some big names, $30,000 to $50,000 speaker that maybe people have heard of and help put butts in seats. But they're also bringing in a lot of speakers that the majority of people have just never heard of or maybe vaguely heard of, right? But the point of bringing those speakers in is to solve one specific problem for one specific audience. Now, the danger, and one thing that you mentioned there, is that sometimes speakers will make the mistake of, I've got a lot of speaking experience, or I've got a lot of knowledge, or I've got a lot of expertise. Therefore, who can I speak to? I don't know, man. I can speak to anyone. I can speak on any stage, right? And what could I speak on? What do you want me to speak about? I can speak about anything, right? We could talk about business or faith or family or politics or religion, or like on and on the list goes. And even if you know something about some of those, even if you're passionate on some of those things, you don't want to position yourself as like this person that does everything for all people. And so we tell speakers all the time is you want to be the steakhouse and not the buffet. The steakhouse and not the buffet. I remember years ago, you and I were in Vegas for a conference and we went out to a good steak. I don't even remember the name of the place we went to, but I remember we were hanging out.
I think it was called the Steakhouse, and it was inside of Circus, which is a terrible resort, but it was one of the most famous. It was the best steakhouse in Vegas.
You were like, hey, what are you doing tonight? Let's go get this. I'm like, dude, I'm in. You said, say no more. And so, we went out, and when you go to like a nice steakhouse there, they've got typically a limited menu where they have steak and not a lot else, right? You're not going to find lasagna. You're not going to find tacos. You're not going to find cupcakes. Like they do steak and that's it. And the dangerous thing is sometimes speakers try to become a buffet where if you go to a buffet, steak is one of 100 things that they offer and they're all mediocre. They're trying to do steak and spaghetti and sushi and tacos and on the list goes. And that's what happens with speakers at times is we just try to spread the net as far and wide as possible versus saying, no, I solve one specific problem for one specific audience. Now, you mentioned like, could this guy go out and get a $10,000 gig? Maybe, and that happens from time to time, but that's not always the case. Like most of the time for most speakers, realistically, when you're getting started is you're typically going to be charging a variety of factors here, but typically between $1,000 and $5,000 for your first several gigs. Now, you can certainly like with some practice, with some experience, you can start to increase that speaking fee. And so there's a variety of factors that kind of go into like, well, what should I charge as a speaker? So one of those factors is going to be your industry and who you are actually speaking to, meaning you can charge more speaking to corporations versus nonprofits. You can charge more speaking to colleges versus elementary schools. It's not that one's better or worse than the other. It's just each kind of industry, each pond is going to have kind of different fee ranges that they are used to charging. Another factor is going to be your marketing materials. So like specifically your website, your demo video, because oftentimes an event planner or decision maker who's considering hiring you, they're not considering hiring you in a vacuum. They're looking at you and 3, 4, 5, a dozen other speakers like you. And so whenever they're looking at your website, your video, and you charge $10,000 and your stuff is like your marketing materials are kind of mediocre and it's kind of vague and it doesn't make a lot of sense, and they're comparing it to a bunch of other speakers who are 7,500 or 5,000 or half the price, they're going like, their stuff just looks better. Like whether we like it or not, people judge books by their cover. So that doesn't mean you need to have spent tens of thousands of dollars on a website and a video, but it does mean that your stuff needs to look sharp and professional because that's what they're gauging you against. Another factor is going to be your experience, meaning Someone who's been a speaker for 5, 10, 20 years is probably just a better speaker than you if you're just getting started, right? And even if you've got some experience of I've done some podcasting, I've done some media, those things are good. It's better than nothing, but it may not always necessarily translate to getting on a stage and speaking to 100 or hundreds of people there. So there's a lot of variables and factors that may go into how much you should charge there. So I think the biggest thing I would say is making sure that as someone is getting into this, like I believe anybody can get booked and paid to speak. However, you have to align your expectations with reality. I think sometimes we just think it's like this American Idol thing of like, I'm just going to go speak and I'm going to be discovered. Or I heard, someone who spoke and they got, $50,000 in their first gig. Like, I guess that's very, very, very hypothetical. But for the average speaker, you can actually absolutely do this. It's also a lot of work, which I'm sure we'll talk about, but just temper your expectations and don't just think, oh, I mentioned that I'm a speaker and all of a sudden I have bookings constantly flowing in here and I don't know what to do with them all. Like, no, you got to treat this like any other business, and you get out of it ultimately what you put into it.
Let's assume for just a moment that the person that we're speaking to that wants to go and get paid to speak relatively soon, let's just assume they have a great stage presence and they do have some experience, several years of experience speaking on various stages in front of a live audience where the audience has been as few as 20 to 50 people and as many as a few hundred. So this is somebody who definitely feels incredibly comfortable on the stage and also is very comfortable as an audience to listen to. So they're gifted as a speaker. This isn't somebody who's learning to speak and wants to get paid to speak. This is somebody who is really good. Keep in mind technique and the overall vibe and feel and comfort of the stage. They're able to captivate the attention of the audience. That person who's just getting started, what are the first steps for them?
Yeah, so one of the things that we do inside the Speaker Lab is we teach the SPEAK framework, makes the acronym SPEAK, S-P-E-A-K. So maybe what would be helpful is we can kind of walk through this at a high level. Some of this we've already kind of touched on here. We can kind of bring it all together in kind of a framework and a roadmap to follow, and that will kind of give us some jumping off points. But the S is to select a problem to solve. Select a problem to solve. And again, this is where you got to be really, really clear on solving one specific problem for one specific audience. And this isn't exclusive to speakers. This is true with anything. Like, Cliff, I know that when you are working with someone around podcasting and someone says, hey, what do I want to do a podcast. And you're going, great, what do you want to do it on? Like, just life, and we're going to talk about sports and politics and marriage and faith. And you're just like, it's probably not going to work real well. If you just, you're wanting to host a radio show. And unless you have some really big name, it's probably not going to work, depending on, again, what your expectations are. So again, we want to solve one specific problem for one specific audience. Next part of the process, P, is to prepare your talk. Be really, really clear on what's the solution that you are providing to the need that the audience has. Now, when we talk about this, I think sometimes that speakers can come into this conversation and go, oh, I know exactly who I want to speak to. I know exactly what I want to talk about, right? But you have to remember here, there's kind of this Venn diagram overlap between what it is that you're interested in, what you're knowledgeable on, what you're passionate about, what you're experienced in, and what is it that organizations and groups actually hire speakers to talk about. Because just because you may be the world's foremost expert on underwater basket weaving and, teaching blind cats how to walk the dog, like, it doesn't mean anybody actually hires speakers to talk about that, right? So a good exercise here that I think is helpful for anyone is to, if you say, okay, I have a rough idea of who I would want to speak to and what I might want to speak about, then at that point, I think it's helpful to go look at two things, and you can just do this on Google. Go look for the type of conferences or events that you might speak at. And don't search for like some big national conference. Oh, here's this huge national, I should speak at that. No. What we're looking for is like a state event, a local event, a regional event, something that's going to be a little bit smaller, because they don't have a $100,000 budget. They have a $5,000 budget. But that doesn't mean that they're looking for a crappy speaker. They still want a really, really good speaker. They just have a limited budget for that. And so that's where we want to be looking at and targeting. So looking up what are the types of events that might hire someone to talk about what I might want to talk about. The second thing that you can do is look for other speakers who may be doing something similar to what you want to do and who are a step or two ahead of you, not light years ahead of you. So if you said, I want to be a motivational speaker, are there opportunities for, Tony Robbins is a motivational speaker, therefore I can do that, right? We're not talking apples and oranges, or not talking apples and apples, like we're totally different things. So look for someone who's like, again, like a step or two ahead of you. Now, what you don't want to do here is you don't want to say, hey, here's what I want to talk about, and here's what I want to talk to, and I can't find any speakers that are doing this. This is perfect. I'm going to be the first, right? We're not trying to be a pioneer here. Okay. We're not trying to be a trailblazer. We're looking for where do existing opportunities already take place, because now it makes it easy for an event planner or decision maker for them to hire you versus you trying to convince someone of like, hey, I talk about this whole new thing that nobody ever talks about, and here's why you should hire me. Like, that's a risk for them. And so you want to remember that for an event planner, a decision maker, they are in the risk mitigation business, because when they hire you, they put you up on stage, they give you a microphone to talk to their audience. They're taking a massive risk. Are you going to say something inappropriate? Are you going to say something that's going to get me in trouble? Are you going to say something rude or condescending to my audience or whatever, right? And so when a speaker leaves that stage, the event planner, decision maker, they want to look like the hero. They want audience members or their boss or their committee or their board to come to them and say, where'd you find Cliff? Like, he was awesome. He was great. Like, that was such a good speaker. Great job on that, right? You don't want them coming to you going like, I mean, he was nice, but it was kind of a weird talk, or it didn't make sense, or just kind of disconnected there. They want to remove the risk. And so the more they can view you and say, oh, you are like the speaker that we've had before, or talk on this thing, or you understand our audience really, really well, therefore we're willing to take the risk on you. That's the type of speaker that you want to be, especially in those early days when you're getting going and getting momentum. So the S, the P, the E is to establish yourself as the expert. So we touched on a little bit earlier, having a website, having a demo video. Like, these things are important. That helps you get credibility with a decision maker who, again, is trying to remove the risk in terms of hiring you. Next one, A, is to acquire paid speaking gigs. Acquire paid speaking gigs. Now, this is the part we want to fast forward to. Like, all right, dude, just tell me, like, how do you book gigs, right? But you got to have some of these other foundational pieces in place first to be clear on who do you speak to? What do you speak about? Do you have some marketing assets in place? And at this point, the dangerous thing is that speakers become much more reactive than proactive, meaning I have my website, I have my video. Now I just sit back and I wait for the phone to ring. And it just doesn't work like that. Like, you got to be much more proactive in saying and identifying what are the types of events, conferences that I may be a good fit for, and starting conversations with them, having a system in place to follow up with them. And the last part of the process, K, is to know when to scale, meaning most people will say, hey, I'm interested in speaking, but Cliff, even like you alluded to earlier, I'm also interested in coaching or consulting or doing a podcast or doing a course or doing a training program or doing some other thing or doing a book, right? And so we always remind speakers, you can do all the things, but you can't do all the things at once. So something's going to come first, something's going to come last. You got to figure out, like in this pie chart here, how does speaking kind of fit into the mix there. So again, that's kind of high level there of the framework that we teach and we walk speakers through at the Speaker Lab.
It's very similar to a lot of the advice I give for people who are looking to build an online business as a coach or do the thought leadership course online business kind of thing. So, but I do definitely enjoy some of the nuances that you're sharing about the public speaking side of things. The fact that you've got to validate your product, and your talk is that product. Are you solving a problem that people have? Find people with money who have a problem where there's lots of pain experienced with that problem, and those people with money are aware that they have a problem and they're willing to pay money to pay someone to solve that problem. Then you must have the ability to solve that problem. And if you want long-term success, you're actually going to have to enjoy solving the problem. There's a lot of carryover with everything that you've just shared, but one of the things I love is that you've got to find a problem that you're solving for the audience. And what I recognize that a lot of people do is like, well, I'm really passionate about this thing, but they don't go validate that anybody's really interested in paying for said thing or sitting in the audience on stage for somebody to talk about said thing.
Totally. And a couple things just to piggyback on that is, we talked about, who do you speak to, what problem you solve? And kind of the third question in there is like, where do these people gather? Yep. Meaning, like, as a speaker, there should be some type of like natural gathering. So if you said, for example, let's go back to this example you were talking about earlier, this guy, and he's like, hey, I want to talk about politics, right? And I'm passionate, or I want to talk about like, things that I'm seeing in current events or the, political climate, right? It's like, okay, that's fine. But like, who would you actually be speaking to? What are you speaking to them about? And then where do those people gather? Because as a speaker, there's got to be some type of like natural gathering where you would speak at that type of event. So like, what are you picturing that you might speak at? And is that a realistic thing? Right. So I'll give you an example. I remember talking with a lady and she was talking about, she had some experience in the education system. She's like, I want to talk to like school boards and schools about things that they're doing wrong and like ways that they can improve. Right. And so I was like, okay, but let's just zoom out for a second and think about this. You may have some valid points here, but are school boards or schools, our superintendents going like, hey, we want to hire a lady who's going to come in and tell us all the things that we're doing wrong and like what she should, how we should all fix things. Like, that's not real compelling. That's not real exciting. And it's not the type of thing where someone's signing up real quick going like, oh, heck yeah, how do we get this lady in as soon as possible to rail on us? Like, that's just not the type of thing that people may be looking for. So you have to, again, like I touched on earlier, is we're kind of looking for that Venn diagram between like, what is it that I'm interested in, what I'm passionate about, and have experience with, and what is it that organizations and groups actually hire speakers to talk about? And it may be also that there's some type of blend there. Okay, so let me give you a quick example. Years ago, when I first got started speaking, I was doing a lot in the education space, speaking specifically to like high schools and high school students. At the time, my wife and I, we were real passionate about, we were kind of going through like some Dave Ramsey stuff and paying off debt and living on a budget and doing that whole thing. I was like, man, I wish like teenagers need to know this stuff, right? So I remember reaching out to a whole bunch of school principals, high school principals, and said, hey, is teaching students about personal finance and money important? They would all be like, yes, absolutely, right? And I was like, cool. What if I did a school assembly on that? And they're like, no, thank you, right?
Nope.
So they would all say it was important, but they don't hire speakers to come in and talk about that. But as an example, one of the things I noticed is they would hire speakers to come in and talk about, hey, we got a lot of students we want to make sure that they are prepared for college and the real world and life, right? And so I was like, okay, what if within that, I could come in and I could talk about how do you help make sure that students have a successful transition into college and the real world. And within that, one of the things that they need to be aware of is money and thinking about that. So the whole talk wasn't about money, but I'd say 5-10% of, hey, what we're talking about, you making a successful transition from high school into college in the real world. Here's one of the things that's going to be a major factor in your life for every day for the rest of your life is you're going to have to know how to handle money. Let's talk about that real quick. So it was talking about like, again, that blend between, oh, here's what I want to talk about, money and personal finance and education there. And a principal going like, yeah, but we really want you to talk about how do you help students just make a successful transition into college in the real world of life, right? So how do I blend those two and not do like this bait and switch of like, oh, you wanted me to talk about this, but I'm going to show up and talk about that instead. No. It's going like, no, I talked about what they hired me to talk about. And within that, one of those subcategories is talking about finance. And so again, that's what we're looking for here is what's this blend between what we're interested in, what we're passionate about, and what is it that organizations and groups say, but here's what we're actually looking for speakers to talk about.
I want to give you a couple of questions that are prepared ahead of time. The first one here says, beyond emceeing an event, keynoting an event, and or speaking at luncheons, what other speaking opportunities can generate income?
Yeah, good question. So there's really no limit to the type of opportunities. Now, some of this is going to be dependent on the type of organization or group that you may be speaking to, right? So it could be a conference, it could be a church, it could be a school assembly, it could be a banquet, it could be a convention, it could be a one-day thing, it could be a multi-day thing. It could be you doing a keynote, it could also be you doing a small breakout or workshop, it could be you doing a 30 or 45 or 60-minute thing, it could be you doing a 5-day thing, right? So there's a lot of different ways you can kind of package this together of what you may be looking for. So I did a virtual thing just the other day for some inmates in a county jail in Florida and did it over Zoom. And I've also done arenas with 10,000 people in them. And so there's a lot of different, like not a one size fits all of this is the way all events must, need to be and what they should look like. So I think this is where one of the things that can be helpful is sometimes people will say, okay, what are the opportunities or where do people gather? And we find like some almost interest or fascination in speaking in some type of field that we're like not connected with or don't have any experience with. Okay, so let me give an example. There's a client we were working with a while back, and he said, I remember he lived in Colorado, and I'm drawing a blank on what he wanted to be speaking on or who he wanted to be speaking to. But I just remember asking him, like, do you have any connections there, any experience there? And he's like, no, I don't know. It seems like there's opportunities that exist there, right? And I was like, okay, let's back up though. Talk to me about your career, your experience. And he had been a realtor for his entire career. He had at one point been like the president of like the Colorado Realtors Association or something. And I was like, let's start there, right? Because that's a world that you know, that you're familiar with, that you have some insider knowledge of. And so I was asking him, like, okay, as the past president of this organization, what were the types of speakers that you would invite in? And what that was one particular, event or association. You're probably connected with other associations or groups. Like as a realtor, what events have you attended over the years that were training events, either internal or external? I went to this conference, or here's this internal thing that my brokerage had me attend. Like, what are the things that you just have experienced as an audience member? Because you at least have some frame of reference of, oh, okay, these are some things that I've seen speakers at that I might be a good fit for. There's another example of a speaker we worked with who came out of the restaurant industry, and it was just like, I'm tired of being in the restaurant industry. I don't want to speak in that space anymore. I said, yeah, but that's a world you're familiar with, you know who the players are, you know who the people are, you can talk their language, like you just understand how they think and operate, versus like, I don't know squat about the restaurant space. So it would be more difficult for me to come into that world because I don't know anything about it. And so for him, he got his start speaking in the restaurant space because it was a world he had some connections with, he knew, and then eventually kind of evolved out of that. And so what we're looking for is, speaking is very much a momentum business. And so what we're looking for is that when we talk about like who you speak to, what you speak about, we're not saying, hey, get a tattoo and this is a permanent decision that you're making. Yeah. We're looking for a starting point of going, okay, I just want to get some reps and I want to get better and I want to kind of figure this out. And then over time, it may mean that you pivot and you evolve into speaking on something different or a different topic. And so, Cliff, exactly like you, if I remember correctly, like part of the reason, or one of the things that you got into podcasting was, it was the show Lost, wasn't it?
Yep. It was the television show Lost.
It was a very niche thing, and like Lost hasn't been on TV for a long time now, right? But it was just like that got me started in this niche thing, and then it evolved to become something much, much bigger than that. But it was going like, okay, I'm doing a podcast on Lost, therefore I can only ever do podcasts on Lost. No, not at all. It's a starting point. And so looking at like your own backyard of going, here's some things that I'm familiar with, I have connections with, I understand how they operate, I understand where they hire speakers, I understand what they hire speakers to talk about, and I see how I might be able to fit into like this existing ecosystem as a starting point. So I think that's a good way to kind of think about all of this.
Yeah, I love that. And as I think about my client who has all of this experience as a lawyer, he could definitely speak in that space, in that industry. Mm-hmm. There are lots of events. Another thing that occurred to me, I mean, one could even start out with workshops and small events. You could host your own. One of my favorite things that I used to tell people all the time, instead of waiting for people to invite you to speak on a stage, invite yourself. Yeah. Invite yourself to speak at your own event. Why not put together something that you believe solves a problem for a specific group of people, and then go out and validate it by asking people to pay you to attend this event that you yourself are hosting. And you could speak all day, every day if you want for your entire event.
A lot of this just comes back to, again, like what your kind of end goal is here, right? So I think about for myself, when I got started as a speaker, the idea of hosting an event, I was like, I don't know anything about hosting an event. It wasn't appealing to me. And however, fast forward, and in our current business model and what it is that we do, I could see that making more sense. And so ultimately, it kind of depends on like why are you interested in speaking? What is it that you're hoping it accomplishes? So for example, when I got started speaking, all I wanted to do was just do as many gigs as I possibly could. I want to go, you hire me, I go speak at your event, I collect a check, I do like a keynote, maybe a workshop or two, and that's it. That's the whole thing. Whereas someone else may say, I want to come in and use speaking as lead generation for coaching or for consulting type of project. So I'll give you a quick example. There's a lady we worked with who she had a business, like a service-based business, where she was doing identity theft protection for high net worth individuals. Okay. So this kind of like niche type of service. And so she wanted to go speak on this thing. And so she was getting paid, a couple $1,000s here and there. And she was like, I would love to make more and charge more. And we were talking about how like it's a niche topic, right? For a niche audience. But one of the things that she talked about was she had the service of providing this identity theft consulting and protection for high net worth individuals on the back end. And so we were talking about like, how much is like the lifetime value of an average client worth for you? And she was talking about it was worth like tens of thousands of dollars because someone would stick with her, not for, weeks or months or years, but like lifetimes, decades. And so the lifetime value for a client for her was significant. And so I said, rather than speaking being about how do I go speak and collect a check, which is going to have a limit to it, how do we look at it through the lens of how do you go speak at the type of events where either your ideal client would be or people who work with your ideal client would be? So lawyers who represent high net worth individuals or financial advisors, those type of people in that industry, in that space. How do you go speak to them? And so one of the things that she found was she started speaking to the people that were adjacent to her clients, and she started being able to charge more, one. And two is oftentimes she would pick up new clients that would be worth way more than what she could speak or than what her speaking fee would be. And so she found like now all of a sudden I'm doing events that are worth tens of thousands of dollars to me because of the clients that it's generating. So again, the point being is like a lot of it comes down to like your framing of speaking. Am I just purely going to speak based on the check that they're going to give me? Or am I going to speak because of the check and some of these additional perks or benefits that may be worth significantly more to me in my business?
Absolutely. I know I have a lot of experience, as you have, going and speaking on stages, and oftentimes for free. Maybe they'll cover travel and hotel and meals or whatever, but oftentimes I've spoken at many events where I go and speak to a couple hundred people, maybe up to 1,000 people who have been absolutely like vetted. These are my exact ideal customers. Somebody else has done all the marketing to gather these people here, and I get to solve a problem that I'm qualified to solve, and I get up on stage and I solve that problem for them. If I've done my job well, those people then begin following me as a result of that. And oftentimes I will track, when somebody onboards as a client or buys a course or something like that, I often ask, how did you first discover me? And it's like, oh, I was in your audience at this such and such target social media marketing world at Michael Hyatt's platform conference or something like that. And I'm like, oh, this thing is still paying off these many years later. But there are some who would love to simply actually get paid to speak on a stage. I have another set of questions here. The next one was, what is it that attracts meeting organizers to a speaker when they're looking to hire somebody in the $10,000 to $25,000 range?
Yeah. So a few things is, again, let's assume that someone has done some speaking that has been paid that amount, right? Because like one way to think about this is when you're getting ready to sell a house, if you put your house on the market, there is going to be what you think the house is worth. And then there's going to be, what is it that the market will actually pay for your house? So if you're going like, hey, I'm a $25,000 speaker, and we're like, have you ever been paid $25,000? Well, no. Have you been paid 20,000, 15,000, 10,000? No, I've never been paid 5,000, but I think I'm a $25,000 speaker. And I'd be like, well, the argument would be like the market disagrees with you. So again, that's not a knock on you. And I know people are like, well, you should just charge what you think you're worth. But there's a difference between what you're worth and what people will actually pay for. Another quick thing here is sometimes people will think that I have some experience or I have some success doing this one thing in my career, whatever that thing may be. Therefore, it should naturally translate to this other thing that I'm going to do. Okay. Speaking as an example, right? So I was a successful CEO in this type of company or industry or space or whatever, and I have a lot of recognition. Therefore, I should be able to be a highly paid speaker, in a similar type space or something. And it doesn't necessarily translate. Okay. So a quick example would be Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan was a very, very successful basketball player. And then he goes, I would like to try baseball. And we saw like he struggled as a baseball player. And just because he was a very, very, very successful basketball player doesn't necessarily mean that it translates and he should be, therefore, a very highly successful baseball player. It doesn't necessarily, cross-pollinate there. So again, without knowing anything about this person, that'd be some initial thing. Is again, I'm not trying to like rain on anyone's parade. I just want to make sure that people have proper expectations and don't think I want to be a $25,000 speaker at the gate, because that typically isn't realistic, right? Now, let's say that someone has been doing some speaking gigs. They're going, okay, I've been paid in that $10,000 to $25,000 range before, and I want to do more of those things, right? So one is making sure that you are in the right pond, okay? Meaning that there are some events where maybe I got paid to do a $10,000, $15,000, $25,000 gig, but that's kind of like the biggest event in my space, right? So you want to make sure that you are in a space where you're speaking at, where there's enough events and opportunities that you can get paid that on a consistent basis. And so, like, for example, if you said, I want to speak to churches, there are probably some churches that would pay $10,000 to $15,000 for a speaker, right? But that's pretty limited, right? In terms of like just the number of opportunities that may exist there. So one is like making sure you are fishing in the right pond where there's enough of those opportunities that exist. The other thing would be that you, again, have enough reps there and enough quality marketing assets, that website, that demo video that we talked about earlier, because they are going to be looking at you and other $10,000 to $25,000 speakers. And so your stuff needs to look sharp. It needs to look professional. It needs to look presentable. And also I would say that the testimonials, the credibility, the events that you have spoke at historically. So, because remember, they're looking at, wow, this speaker A has spoke to, 50 other companies that are kind of like in our industry or in our space. And here's some like really high caliber testimonials, and their demo video is really, really sharp. And then I look at speaker B, and they just haven't done as much, and they haven't done as much in our space. Because again, we're in that risk mitigation business. And so it feels a little bit more risky to hire speaker B versus speaker A, because I just see that they have done more in the space. They've got more reps. They've done more in our industry. They probably understand our space more. And so those would be some of the type of things that you would be like considering and looking at if you're someone who's going like, hey, I want to do this on a consistent basis. One other thing I would say is that we've seen this to be the case with a lot of speakers is going, like we touched on earlier, of I've had some success in my career and I just want to speak. And the reality is that the business of speaking is not standing on stage and giving a presentation. That's the fun part. The reality is like 95% of the business is getting the gig itself, which means reaching out to people, following up with people, like basic customer service, basic prospecting, basic lead management. Like those are the things that you have to do. And the reward of that is you get to get on stage and give a presentation, right? And so I think it's easy to fall in love with the end result. And so I remember very early in my career, I had a speaker friend and mentor who told me, you have to fall in love with the process. You have to fall in love with the process of, meaning like you have to fall in love with doing the work, the hard work behind the scenes that nobody sees, that leads to the result of, man, I get to stand on stage, and the reward is I get to stand on stage and make a difference in this audience. But I got to do the work that leads to that result versus like, I just, again, close my eyes and really tight, and I just, gigs magically fall into my lap, because it just doesn't work like that.
So what I'm hearing is you need to make sure that you're solving a problem, a very specific problem for a very specific audience. And if you want to get paid at that level, you'll need to choose an industry with an audience where there are enough speaking gigs that actually pay people at your level of speaking. Also, given your answer to the question, what are people at that level who are event planners hiring somebody at that particular price point? What are they looking for? They're looking for reps, not just reps of you on a stage, but also your experience within this industry speaking to this particular audience on this particular topic. And so what I envision is this process is you do a couple of breakouts and you start getting out there and you may speak at a very low fee or even no fee for a little bit while you get your reps in and you build this stuff up, build your reputation, build your credibility. And then all of a sudden, and the one thing that we haven't mentioned is getting on stage, you never know who's sitting in that audience, who's thinking of an event. And if you can resonate with them, if you can deliver such a powerful, transformative experience for them, the number of people who might come up and say, listen, what would it take for you to come speak at my event? I need you. What does it cost to hire you? One final question I'm going to ask you here. What's the best way for new speakers to book engagements? If just getting started out, how do they go about finding the events and saying, I want to speak at your event?
Yeah. So the best thing to do is to ask. And so again, the mistake is, again, being reactive and just waiting. Like, I hope someone finds me. They're just not. There's just a sea of speakers that are out there. There's too many options and opportunities that exist. And so you have to be way more proactive. And so a good example would be like, I remember in high school, for example, that as a high schooler a teenage boy who's wanting to make money, one of the best things that I could do was when it snowed and I'd get out of school, me and a buddy would go to the fancy neighborhoods and we would go door to door shoveling driveways. And it'd be awesome. We'd make 20 bucks a driveway. And by the end of the day, we had, wads of cash. It was amazing, right? The reason that worked wasn't because like, oh, it's snowing and let's just sit indoors and hope someone calls me. The reason it worked is we went door to door and said, hey, I see that there's a problem in your driveway. Would you like me and my buddy to make that problem disappear in exchange for cash? And a lot of them said, yes, please, here's 20 bucks, make that go away. And it was great, right? Because we went door to door. Now, that takes a lot of courage. That takes a lot of putting ourselves out there of going, hey, here's this existing problem you have. Can we help you with that? Versus, again, just kind of like sitting, hoping, waiting that someone, would magically think of us. And they're just not going to. So what that means practically is spending time on Google, spending time on ChatGPT and saying and being clear on like, okay, here's who I want to speak to, what I want to speak about. Looking for, ideally, like we talked about, smaller type conferences. Smaller conferences are not bad conferences versus like saying, I want to speak at some, big national type. I want to be on some big stage. Well, it's going to be way more competitive and harder to get into versus a small local, regional, state level conference that's going, we have $5,000, we have $7,500, we have $10,000 for a speaker. We don't have $100,000, but we still want a really, really good speaker. And oftentimes, if you can find something that's fairly local or regional to you, they may be more likely because they're going to have less travel costs associated with bringing you in. So starting to actually look for events and then reaching out to them. And so a simple way to reach out to them is just to rather than like this kind of spray and pray approach of I found 100 events and I kind of copy and paste them into a generic email, send it out and send some like 97 paragraph email about here's who I am as a speaker. Here's why I'm so amazing. Here's my life story. Here's why you should hire me. Don't do that. What you're trying to do is starting a conversation with them. And email is a really good, effective way to do that. Or reaching out on LinkedIn is another good, effective way. And the goal is, again, to start a conversation with them, not to try to like book a gig on day one. You're trying to ask them out on a date. And one is just to like build some rapport here. And so one thing that works well is to reach out and said, hey, Cliff, I saw that you are planning this event in the spring, this XYZ conference in the spring in Louisville. And so I wanted to reach out and see, when will you start reviewing speakers for that event? Because for this, I'm not trying to convince you to hire a speaker. You're already planning on hiring a speaker. I'm just figuring out, I'm not trying to say like, hey, you have to hire me. I'm just trying to figure out what is your next step in the process? Because most likely, again, you're kind of gathering names. It's probably not just you that's making the decision. It's probably you and a board or a committee, and everyone's kind of gathering speakers. And then we're going to get together at some point in the next couple of weeks or months, compare notes on speakers, and we're going to start the process. And so what you're trying to do as a speaker is figure out, where is this event planner at in the process? And so the mistake here is if a speaker or if an event planner says, oh, well, we just started gathering event or speakers and we're going to start reviewing that in 3 months. The mistake that a speaker would make is saying like, okay, well, when you get to that point, I hope you think of me. They're just not going to, because they're going to sleep between now and then. Life is going to happen between now and then. They're going to be like, I think I heard about a speaker at one point that reached out to me, but like they've just moved on. So if they say, hey, we're going to be reviewing speakers in 3 months, you need to say, can I follow up with you in 3 months? They're going to say yes, because they don't believe that you're actually going to do it. And then you need to have some type of CRM system process. And this is one of the things that we teach and help speakers set up, so that then in 3 months, you reach out to them. Hey, we talked to you 3 months ago. You mentioned you were going to be reviewing speakers. I just want to see if that was still on track. If you need anything from me prior to your committee meeting, right? They're going to be like, holy crap, I didn't think you would actually do this. Because part of what you're doing there is you're giving them a preview of, this is what it's like to work with me. Because not only am I going to be great to work with on stage, I'm going to be great to work with off stage, and I'm going to make your life easier. And so those type of like doing little things like that, again, it's not sexy, it's not glamorous, it's hard work, it's follow-up, it's like in the trenches, hand-to-hand combat, but it's very, very effective at that point for getting the ball rolling. Now from there, the more you speak, meaning like you alluded to, Cliff, there's going to be events you speak at and someone's going to be in the audience and they're going to invite you. You're going to speak at something, and then 3 years later, that event planner is like, hey, you were awesome 3 years ago. Can you come back? Can I refer you to this other event planner? And like, that's going to start to happen organically over time. But initially, you're kind of doing a lot of like physical labor to kind of get the ball rolling. And those type of proactive things are going to work way more effectively than, I did a social media post and I hope someone reaches out to me. They're just not going to. So again, be much more proactive in the beginning than reactive.
I love that. And I have something real quick that came to my mind to piggyback on everything you just said. The first thing is obviously you're going to choose to solve a problem for a very specific audience. All right, so now you know who that audience is. My recommendation is go to Facebook, search for that audience, that whatever that demographic is, that characteristic group is, and look for Facebook groups that have more than 10,000 members in the Facebook group itself, and ideally one that has somewhere between 75 to 2,000 posts a day inside of the group. Once you're inside of that group where your target audience exists, ask this question. Hey, if somebody wanted to solve this problem and was willing to immerse themselves in the solution to this problem, what event should they look to attend live? And then let that group say, I'd go to this event, I'd go to this event, I'd go to this event. And now you have those lists of events, and then you could do the thing that Grant just said. And just a personal anecdote to back up what Grant said, I did the Free the Dream conference in 2018 and 2019. Stephanie and I hosted this. I knew that I wanted to invite a few of my friends and mentors to speak at the event. But what I wasn't prepared for was the number of people in my community who's like, Cliff, are you looking for speakers? I want to speak. I want to speak. I want to speak. And I will tell you, I actually had, I think, somewhere between 9 to 13 speakers at my 2.5-day event, both in 2018 and 2019. All of those speakers who actually spoke at my event spoke because they consistently reached out to me. Consistently. And the ones who didn't speak at Free the Dream 2018, this is a very important little detail. The ones who asked for the opportunity to speak on my stage in 2018 but didn't get to, but did get to in 2019, they were all attendees, paid attendees of my event in 2018, which even further boosted the relationship, their investment in my community, and which led them to that opportunity. So just a little additional insight to piggyback on that. Grant, tell us about the Speaker Lab. What is it? Who's it for? And how can it serve them?
Yeah, everything that we do is over at thespeakerlab.com. And so if you like this podcast, you probably listen to other podcasts. And so we have a podcast by the same name, the Speaker Lab Podcast. We've got nearly 600 episodes there. We've been going for almost 10 years on it. We touched on a book earlier, The Successful Speaker, 5 Steps for Booking Gigs, Getting Paid, Building Your Platform. We've got a lot of free resources in addition to the podcast over at thespeakerlab.com, blog posts and articles, a lot of different resources. We even have a free speaking fee calculator. So if you go to myspeakerfee.com, you answer a couple questions, it'll spit out a number of what you could charge as a speaker. So it's much more art than science. So don't overanalyze it, but it's a good resource to kind of get you in the ballpark. So yeah, a lot of resources in the speaking community to help people ultimately get booked and paid to speak and to share their message, make an impact and an income from it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'll put a link to all of those things, the podcast, the Speaker Lab, training resources that you have, the speaker fee thing that you just mentioned, your book. All of that will be in the show notes for this podcast episode. Grant, it is a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much for investing this hour with us and answering these questions.
Always good to see you, buddy. And if there's anything we can do to help support you or your community, anybody can holler anytime.
Well, that was my conversation with Grant Baldwin, and I have already shared this conversation with the client who inspired me to create this episode. In fact, following this conversation, I had the entire thing transcribed, and I created what I call copious notes on all of the valuable insights that I wanted to make sure that my client pulled from my time with Grant. And what I ended up with could actually be turned into a full, small ebook on how to get paid to speak. I want you to check out the show notes for this episode because I've included the full text of all of those notes that I shared with my client right here for you. Now, you've probably picked up on most of these insights, but I want to make sure that you go and read them because there might be a few that surprise you. If you're still listening to me at this point into the episode, I think I know something about you. You're probably a communicator, a creator, You are someone with a great deal of experience and skill. You also have a genuine desire to serve others. And my guess is that you're probably already out there serving in some form. And if you're like most people that I work with, you're probably already working hard to build your business, to grow your audience, and serving them with content and showing up consistently. Yet, even though you may have poured countless hours of time, effort, and energy into serving your audience, the profit from all of that work doesn't yet reflect the impact that you're making on other people's lives. One of the things that I've noticed over the years is that the endless cycle of content creation and online business hustle without income has left so many people feeling overwhelmed. And if that sounds familiar to you, it may be time for a different approach. One of the things that I recognize is people need a proven roadmap and a guide that has already walked this path before them. One of the things that I've done is created from my own experience and my own journey, but also witnessing those who have succeeded in building profitable, sustainable online businesses and those who have failed. And over the years, I've recognized and put into an 11-step framework paired with my personal coaching, a program that will give you clarity, structure, and strategy that actually can convert your experience into income. If you've been listening to me for a while, you probably already know that over the past 20 years, I am personally responsible for training more than 40,000 people on the successful launch of their podcast. And as an online business owner, I've personally generated millions of dollars through online course sales, physical products, one-off training tutorials, paid webinars, public speaking, in-person workshops, conferences, paid mastermind groups, one-on-one coaching, and several other streams of income. And with all of this success, many of those who had learned how to podcast from me began asking, Cliff, how did you achieve this? I am struggling to build a profitable business around my podcast. And in having a conversation with each of these individuals over time, I noticed a prevalent misconception. These clients presumed that launching a podcast was a great first step towards creating a profitable business. These individuals had, in fact, invested a substantial amount of time, effort, and energy attracting an audience, serving them at the highest level, but they weren't getting paid. They didn't have the right audience or a great product to market fit. And that is why I created and crafted an 11-step framework, a formula to walk people through on how to build a sustainable and profitable online business. And what I recognized when I had this framework is that most start with step 8, which is create content and building your audience. But these first 7 steps are what makes every profitable business work. So back in 2017, I stopped teaching people how to launch a podcast so that I could dedicate my efforts toward guiding my clients into the experience of what they truly wanted, which was running a successful, profitable business, doing something they love, turning their experience into income. And since then, I have been guiding my clients step by step through these crucial initial stages so that they can finally realize that business of their dreams. Today, I have the Building an Online Business program This is a combination of the workshop that I used to teach here in my Next Level studio live. It was professionally recorded, put into an online course that gives you everything that I shared with those live participants, recorded in such a way that you feel like you're in the studio with me. But this is definitely not just an online course. Instead, this is a combination of this entire framework with some incredible bonus sessions that are included that will help you take everything you do to the next level. But you get this 11-step framework and 2 90-minute one-on-one coaching sessions with me. Now, my one-on-one coaching, if you're not a client who has signed up with me for a year, a single 90-minute session with me is $1,500. You get 2 of those sessions in this Building an Online Business program. That's $3,000 worth of value of one-on-one coaching. But you not only get the 2 90-minute sessions with me, you also get the entire Building an Online Business course, which is the recording of everything I taught in this workshop. And you get unique guidance from me through these coaching sessions to get you the answers that are specific to your situation, your circumstance. If you are a content creator, aspiring entrepreneur, somebody who's been building a business for several years but still struggling to find consistent, sustainable, profitable income from your efforts, I would love to journey with you. Through my Building an Online Business program, you have access to all of my framework that has helped hundreds of others succeed in finding profit in their business. In fact, those who attended this session live, many of them doubled and or tripled their income. Several of them who had zero income prior to the workshop experience ended up earning recurring revenue in the thousands of dollars simply because of what they learned that is now contained inside of this course. If any of this is resonating with you, I want you to head over to my website today. Go to cliffravenscraft.com and then click Work with Me. And on that page, you will see all of the details about my Building an Online Business program, where you and I can work together to take all of that content that you're creating and all of your experience and turn it into income so that you can finally realize the business of your dreams. cliffravenscraft.com, click the Work With Me tab today, enroll, and let's journey together.
Mindset Answer Man.